This dog barked at everyone who tried to touch him until a little girl stepped forward, knelt by his cage, and whispered, "I remember you." In that instant, the dog froze. What happened next left the entire shelter in stunned and tearful silence. The shelter was always noisy in the afternoons. Dozens of dogs barked, their voices echoing off the cinder-block walls in a chorus of longing and fear. But in the farthest kennel behind a thick metal gate, there was only silence. Max, a large German shepherd with haunted eyes, pressed himself into the corner as if trying to disappear into the concrete itself. His ribs showed through his matted coat, and no matter how many times the staff brought him fresh blankets, he never laid on them. He only crouched low, his gaze wary and untrusting. "Don't get too close," one of the volunteers would warn any newcomer. "He'll snap if you reach for him." And it was true. When hands came near, Max's lips curled back in a silent snarl, and his body went rigid with panic. They tried everything: gentle voices, treats, even professional trainers. Nothing worked. He wouldn't eat if anyone watched. He wouldn't walk on a leash. And he never stopped glancing at the door, as if waiting for someone who would never come. Most visitors didn't even pause by his kennel anymore. They moved quickly past, drawn to friendlier faces and wagging tails. It was easier to pretend he wasn't there. Easier to forget the dog whose heart had shattered so completely he couldn't bear another touch. The staff had begun to accept the unspoken truth. Some animals couldn't be saved. But even then, Max's story wasn't over. It was a gray morning when the shelter door swung open and a woman stepped inside, her coat damp from drizzle. At her side was a little girl clutching a stuffed rabbit to her chest. She looked around with wide, searching eyes. The shelter director met them in the lobby. "Can I help you?" she asked gently. The woman's voice trembled. We lost our dog over a year ago when we had to move. He's a German shepherd, and I heard you might have taken one in." She swallowed hard. "My daughter still talks about him every night." The director's gaze softened. "We do have a German shepherd, but he's not like the others. He's very fearful. He doesn't let anyone close." "I'd still like to see him," the woman insisted. He rested a hand on the little girl's shoulder. With a hesitant nod, the director led them down the corridor, lined with kennels. Most of the dogs barked eagerly, pressing their noses to the bars. But when they reached the last enclosure, everything went quiet. Max was curled into himself in the far corner, his head turned away. At the sound of footsteps, he lifted his eyes, tense and weary. The little girl stepped forward. She didn't flinch at his growl. Instead, she pressed her small hand to the cold metal bars. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Max," she breathed. "It's me." And in that instant, something flickered behind the dog's guarded eyes. Something fragile, like the memory of hope. The shelter workers held their breath as Max's body went rigid, his ears flicking forward at the sound of the tiny voice. For a moment, no one moved. The little girl pressed closer to the bars, her eyes filling with tears. "Do you remember me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's Lily. I never forgot you." Max let out A low, uncertain whine, his gaze locked on her face. Slowly, he uncurled from the corner, each step hesitant as though he couldn't trust what he was seeing. "Easy," the director murmured, her hand hovering near the latch. "Sweetheart, maybe step back just a little." But Lily didn't move. Crouched down so her eyes were level with Max's. "You were my best friend," she said softly. "I'm sorry we left you. I didn't want to." A shudder passed through the dog's body, his tail, stiff with fear for so long, gave a single, uncertain wag, then another. The director pressed a hand over her mouth. She'd never seen Max take even a step toward anyone without growling. But now, he was inching closer, drawn by a voice he hadn't heard in over a year. Lily extended her fingers through the gap in the bars. "It's okay," she whispered. "Again. I remember you." Max paused, his nose quivering as he sniffed her hand. And for the first time since he'd arrived, he didn't pull away. For a few heartbeats, the room was silent, except for the soft sound of Max's breathing. His nose brushed Lily's fingertips, and a tremor ran through his body. Slowly, cautiously, he leaned forward and pressed his muzzle into her palm. The director felt her throat tighten. He'd spent months watching this dog cower in the shadows, certain no one could reach him. But here he was, closing his eyes, as Lily stroked the fur between his ears. Lily smiled through her tears. "I knew you'd remember," she whispered, her voice soft as a lullaby. "I missed you every day." Max's tail thumped once, then again, growing more certain with each beat. He pressed his body closer to the bars, soaking in her scent as though trying to be sure she was real. Lily kept talking, her words tumbling out in a rush of relief. She told him about her new bedroom, about the way she'd kept his old collar on her nightstand. He promised he'd never be alone again. One of the volunteers wiped her eyes, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Look at him." Max shifted, pressing his cheek to the cold metal as if he were trying to push through it to reach her. His eyes, once flat and empty, now shone with something that looked very much like hope. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just surviving. He was remembering what it felt like to belong. The adoption paperwork was signed faster than anyone could have imagined. The director barely managed to finish explaining the forms before Lily's mother pressed the pen into her hand. "We're not leaving him again," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. Max waited in the kennel, watching every movement with wide, uncertain eyes. But when Lily returned, holding the old blue leash he'd worn as a puppy, his tail gave a tentative wag. "Ready to come home?" she asked gently. With a soft whine, Max stepped forward. This time there was no hesitation. The latch clicked open, and he walked out into the hallway as if he'd never been afraid at all. As they passed the other kennels, volunteers and staff gathered to watch. Some reached out to stroke Max's back, and though he flinched at first, he didn't pull away. He only kept his gaze locked on Lily, as if she were the only thing that mattered. Outside, the sky had cleared. Pale sunlight fell across the shelter. Steps as Lily knelt to hug him, her small arms wrapping around his thick neck. "You're safe now," she murmured into his fur. "I promise." Max pressed his face against her shoulder, his body finally relaxing in her embrace. And as they walked toward the car, toward home, no one doubted that some bonds could survive anything, even time, even fear, even the deepest kind of loss.